Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Batwoman, the latest episode of Supergirl, the latest episode of The Walking Dead, as well as the latest episode of Watchmen. Like always, if I'm talking about something that you want to listen to, you can always look in the description down below. I include a time when I start talking about each of the respective shows. So, for example, if you want to hear what I had to say about this week's episode of Batwoman, you can skip to what I had to say about this week's episode of Supergirl, this week's episode of The Walking Dead, and or this week's episode of Watchmen. But the first thing I'm going to talk about is this week's episode of Batwoman. A great episode. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. We get thrown in with our new villain. We get introduced to the Executioner, which is interesting. I wonder, does he always typically have some connection to I'm not familiar with him comic book wise and stuff like that, but I'm familiar with him because of Gotham, because he was played by Michael Chiklis in Gotham. But I'm wondering, because does he always have some tie to law enforcement in some shape or form? Because obviously, in Gotham he was captain of the GCPD. I think that was his position. But obviously in this, he's an executioner. Obviously different spectrums of the law enforcement, but nevertheless. And what's also interesting too, because obviously the main antagonist of this season is Alice. Which is interesting because that's if you compare it to the Gotham situation, Alice was tied to the Mad Hatter, which Alice was tied to Michael Chiklis's character becoming the Executioner. So it's just kind of interesting that kind of gets reflected in this. Their storylines happen at the same time. They don't have anything to necessarily do with each other, but still it's just kind of interesting timing in the grand scheme of things. What was interesting was his little note that basically the first guy that died, his name is Stanton. It's he took down a lot of bad people, including Jack Napier, aka Joker. Which Joker never really officially has any name. He has multiple names. In the Telltale games, no one knows his name, so they just refer to him as John Doe. So obviously Gotham was the first ones. Gotham and the movie Joker, I think, are the first ones to actually give him an actual name and identity beforehand. I mean, technically speaking, it's two different identities you want to get technical about when it comes to the whole Gotham situation. But regardless, going on a bit of a tangent there. I can't be sure, but maybe I'm mistaken. Isn't Jack Napier the name of Jack Nicholson's Joker from the movies? Once again, I can never remember what movie it was. Was it Batman Forever? Is that the one with him? I don't remember. That might have been his name. I don't know. Maybe that's probably one of his many aliases, like John Doe or Jack Napier. I feel like I've heard that one before, Jack Napier. But nevertheless, I thought that was kind of interesting. It's so you've tackled with some of the top villains in town and stuff like that. And another interesting thing I noticed and I thought was kind of interesting is they reference Mayor Cobblepot, and I'm so he was mayor at one point in time, which we know in this universe he is Penguin, because I literally rewatched Elseworlds the other day, and obviously one of the cells in Arkham Asylum says Cobblepot, so it's okay, so I guess that was before he shifted over to being the Penguin, or maybe he kind of did the same thing Oliver did, where it's or Oliver was Green Arrow and the mayor, he was probably I'm the Penguin working in the shadows, but in the daylight I'm Mayor Cobblepot type of thing. It might be something similar to that, which is interesting, which is another interesting tie to Gotham, because he ended up being the mayor, but maybe that's something that happens in maybe certain storylines, even in the comic books, he becomes mayor at different points in time. I just think it's kind of interesting, but regardless, it makes me wonder, is it kind of pulling a little bit from Gotham's continuity, or is this just pulling from stuff from the comic books as well? It just kind of gets my mind wondering about stuff like that. I've always kind of wondered about stuff like that, but nevertheless, focusing back on the main points of this episode is actually kind of an interesting case, because this is the first situation where Batwoman is outright called by the GCPD. The city is calling for Batwoman to step in, and even she's yeah, I can't screw this up, because obviously her dad has an issue with this whole Batwoman thing, because he doesn't like mass vigilantes coming in to kind of save the day and stuff like that, because he has issues with Batman, and so obviously that translates over to Batwoman as well. And I think that's so interesting. It's that complicated thing of being a vigilante, of you operating outside of the law. It kind of puts you at odds with the law, that whole complicated thing, which I think Batman was fortunate enough to have Gordon on his side to kind of make it so that a lot of that kind of gets Gordon let a lot of that slide. So I think that's why things kind of worked out. He had allies in the GCPD is what I'm trying to say, whereas Kate's still kind of on her own. The city kind of has her back, so do the GCPD, but obviously the Crows, more so Jacob. Not much of a fan, but we kind of get into that a little bit later on. But obviously she's trying her best to deal with this situation, because obviously they have one particular suspect. He's connected to Stanton, and what was the other dude's name? Connolly, I think, the cop or whatever that was involved in this. But it turns out, like, obviously they end up finding I love that moment of, like, it's like, okay, so what, they find, like, that stuff he had stolen, which has also got to suck for Kate, like, having gotten hit by that truck he was driving. It's like, well, at least, very least, my aching ribs, there was a benefit to all this, because we got the license plate, which I think that's actually pretty dope, that, it's like the suit ended up kind of imprinting it a little bit just because of the fibers it's made out of. I thought, oh, that's actually kind of pretty neat on, like, a, technical level of just, like, some of the suit stuff that the suit is capable of. But once again, kind of going on a bit of a tangent. But getting into what I was talking about, the fact that she picked up the material, she's like, I don't see any other traps here. And she's like, okay, so what's the Batman protocol in these circumstances? And he's like, because Luke's like, okay, I don't know, like, what to make of this. But it turns out there's a flash drive that proves the dude who's an actual executioner, he was, an actual executioner, and and everything. And it turns out for him, he found out that 3 people, there was a judge, a cop, and obviously Stanton, the prosecutor, who were all dirty. That basically, it's because everyone gave them, definitely Stanton, this thing of like, oh, he was a good guy and all that, oh man, he was the best of the best, locking up bad guys and stuff like that. Even for Luke, because it turns out Lucius is dead in his universe, which I might have referenced, wondering about that whole situation, because obviously Luke's there and not Lucius. But I had referenced the fact is that I might have talked about this, but spoilers for the Telltale Batman game. But Lucius had died in that, so I don't know if that's something that typically happens in the story, or maybe it's just something they do with certain storylines. But it turns out he was actually murdered, and Stanton helped put that guy away, in which for obviously listening to this guy be like, basically all these people, he starts noticing it's like all these people that ends up getting arrested and executed, it becomes like a race thing of like, oh, these are black people, these are people who are kind of poor, and or probably like it's easy to kind of frame them up, and they might not be able to afford probably like the proper representation, especially when the cards are so stacked against them. And for the executioner, it's like, dude, I thought I was doing justice, I was killing bad people, that's what made it okay. But for him now, it's like, how many of those people were innocent, making me into a murderer? They made me into a murderer for their own particular reasons why they went about things this way, and for him it's like, that isn't justice, so that's why he's going about killing all of them, because it's like, that's justice. And obviously this is a complicated thing, because for Luke, it's like, if we do this, that means every case of Stanton's is going to be reopened, including my father's murderer. But Kate's like, yeah, I get that, but at the same time, it's like, letting things kind of continue as they are, like that's not justice either. So it's that hard thing of like having to put your personal reasons aside to do what is the right thing. And I thought that was kind of a neat element to it. It's actually interesting because that all kind of ties into, like, because obviously when Kate, as Batwoman, brought the evidence to clear that dude's name and making it known, like, who the executioner really was, obviously Jacob didn't want to listen, because it's like, oh, it's from someone part of the Bat family, I'm not listening to them. And we kind of get into it where it's like, why do you hate Batman so much? It's like, because of what happened. It's like, if it wasn't for him, your sister Beth wouldn't be Alice right now. Which Kate, it's like, it hits her to be like, she hits Bat being like, no, the reason why Beth is Alice now is because you gave up on her. Even when there was no proof, there was some part of me that was always screaming that she was still alive, but obviously you didn't want to listen. You didn't listen then, and you're not listening now, because for him, it's his whole bias against Batman. And it's so interesting. I think it's actually kind of a neat element, because remember, Kate started off with that same bias too. She hated Batman, but then she found out what Batman is Bruce, and then Bruce looked after her. He was, they were so close, and now realizing that and finding out like Bruce, for one, being Batman was never an easy thing. It took its toll on him. She's kind of come to see that and to understand like the complications of living such a double life and what kind of toll it took on not just his life, but him himself. Even finding out, from Luke, it's like that day haunts him, because it's like things should have worked out, but it didn't. Why didn't things work out? That was the mystery he could never solve. And so, I think that's why Kate's willing to defend Batman even more, because like now knowing it's Bruce, and the fact is it's something that never slipped Bruce's mind. He never got over, basically, for him, it's like, once again, it's like Luke said, it's like the only family he has left in his world, he blames himself for like some of it dying, you know? So I thought that's kind of an interesting thing, like to see, you know, because Kate has to stick up for Batman because, you know, because she doesn't blame him anymore, but obviously her dad kind of holds on to that, which obviously there was a confrontation because it's an interesting thing. And, you know, it's like, obviously it's, you know, something Kate kind of has to answer to when it comes to both Jacob and the executioner, because he's like, the fact of the matter is, you tell me to believe in the justice system, because she's like, the fact of the matter is killing that judge isn't going to make anything better. You need to let, you know, it's like he'll pay because he'll have to face the justice system, and it's not perfect, but we still have to let, you know, it can't be paved with blood. Justice can't be paved with blood, but it's like, you say all that about the justice system and letting it do its thing, but if that were the case, why are you hiding behind a mask? Which is also the same thing, you know, because Jacob is like, the fact of the matter is, we're the ones, because it's that whole thing of like, you know, because of heroes, people lose faith in cops. It's like, the fact of the matter is, cops are just as much heroes, and that's the whole thing of like, how are we supposed to compete with a hero who gets to do whatever they want to? They don't have to adhere to the law. You don't have to listen to anyone else. You don't have to follow any else's rule. So what makes you so great? What makes you so heroic? And it kind of puts Kate in that compromising position of like, yeah, like just because you wear a mask doesn't mean you get to have free reign to do whatever you want. But it's the whole thing of like, you wear the mask to protect the people you are close to. You know, it's not just about protecting your anonymity. It's also about protecting the people that are closest to you, because once you've made enemies, they'll come after you. And then we'll also circle back to, you know, that great question that always comes up when it comes to Batman. It's like, obviously, you know, Jacob's blaming like, oh, Batman's the reason why. Well, for one, my family died, but also the fact of the matter is all the bad guys that Gotham has had to deal with. It's always the thing of what came first, the chicken or the egg, Batman or the crazies, the megalomaniacs, the top tier villains, you know, and not even the top tier villains, but the villains in general, whether it be your Poison Ivies, your Clayfaces, your Riddlers, your Oswald Cobblepots. A reason why I specifically referenced them, because once again, I've been rewatching Elseworlds. I recently watched that. So that should in itself been a clue that Riddler exists in his universe already anyway, because I forgot about that. But once again, regardless, going on a bit of a tangent. But like, I always think that's kind of an interesting thing of like, you know, who attracts who? Do the villains attract the hero, or does the hero attract the villain? It's almost basically a symbiotic relationship, you know. So I always thought that was kind of an interesting element that always typically gets associated with Batman. I feel like it can apply to all the other heroes in this, you know, in particular in the Arrowverse. But usually, like when you hear that about heroes, I feel like you can typically hear that about the more vigilante heroes, whether it be like, you know, Batman, and I guess in the Marvel case, Spider-Man. Like, I feel like it typically is associated with them because they are labeled as kind of vigilantes. Once again, it's like that crazy thing of like vigilantes and heroes being a different thing. Because like, Barry had to deal with that a tiny bit, but never a lot. Jeff, a little bit, not a lot. Kara, a little bit, not a lot. Especially because Superman, it's the thing of like, well, they're heroes, whereas like Jeff and Oliver are vigilantes, whereas Kara and Barry are considered heroes. You know, it's that whole stipulation or whatever. But I like that Kate was able to kind of get to the heart of it with her dad, because her dad is like, the reason why he's so hard on Batman is because if he doesn't have Batman to blame, that would mean it's my fault in the end. And that actually kind of gets Kate thinking, because like, it's like, I want to blame my dad, but the fact is it turns the blame on herself, because it's like, I was the one that was literally inches away from her. We were across each other from that door, and I didn't feel anything. So like, all that she learned last episode is sitting with her and making her think like, it's my fault more so than anything, because I'm the one that walked away and said the place was clear, so I can't just blame dad. Like, I have my own fault. And I think that's something, you know, that guilt is kind of, you know, ridden her, and they had that moment of like, you know, hugging it out at the end. I thought was kind of pretty neat. So there's that element to it. Then there's the whole situation with Sophie, who obviously believes Kate to be Batwoman. Obviously Kate left her with Mary. It's like, yeah, help her with the bullet wound, but also make sure she doesn't leave. But I like that whole situation of like, as Sophie's about to leave, Mary brings up the good point of like, oh, so you're going to betray another person. Like, obviously Batwoman's just trying to do her job. She's trying to help and everything. And you're just going to go and expose her and betray her again and betray her. And it's like, don't you get tired of basically hurting people like that? And she's like, what are you talking about? It's like, well, what about the Kate situation? I still think maybe there's going to be some truth where it's like basically there were like someone kind of forced Sophie's hand. That's what I kind of get the feeling of, maybe like that we're going to find out. That was something I kind of threw out earlier, but I was thinking like maybe someone forced her hand to kind of break Kate's heart like she did. Part of me wondered if that was Jacob, but it's like maybe that was the case, maybe not. I don't know. Whatever the case may be, I kind of don't think it was Jacob, but we'll see whether that ends up being the case or not. Not unless it turns out to end up being like Catherine or something, because that'd be interesting. But nevertheless, it's a thing of like, you hurt Kate. No matter what the circumstances were, you hurt her. Like, you did a lot of damage. She literally had to cross the sea to get away from you. And the fact is, here you are with someone else, and you're pretending like your entire relationship didn't exist. Even to the point you're not even telling your fiance about your connection to Kate. You, even when he brings up the fact is, oh, you've never told me about Kate. You've still never mentioned what history you have. And you know how heartbreaking that is to be like non-existent in someone's world of like, oh, I guess our time together. The fact is that we loved each other, whether you'd admit it or not that you loved me. Like, the fact is you're not even willing to accept that is, you know, a hard pill to swallow. So it's like, I guess, you know, it's like, and even Mary is like, I hope you don't end up betraying me either, because like if my dad finds out about this, he'll shut this place down. And obviously a lot of people who can't get the medical care they need, you know, get turned away because for whatever circumstances. She wants to help those people. So it's like the good work I do will be compromised. So please don't tell my dad about this. So by the end, we had that complicated thing of Sophie not saying anything to Jacob about Kate nor Mary, because I think for her, she does recognize, because obviously she justified it by being like, I'm trying to protect Batwoman, because obviously I don't want her to get hurt, because obviously she does care about her, and you know, because she knows that Kate could get killed during all of this. Now, sadly for Kate, she doesn't have someone to kind of, you know, she doesn't have a John Jones to kind of morph into her to kind of keep her secret identity. But it's interesting, like, not everyone's had this. Basically, this is that point where every hero has to deal with that situation of the people closest to you finding out about your identity. Obviously, Oliver's had to deal with this on multiple occasions. Barry's had to deal with it on multiple occasions. A lot of times, it's him revealing his identity to most people, but obviously, like in the case of Iris figured it out on her own. Then there's like Jeff Henderson kind of found out, but that's not the only instance of him having to really deal with that. Kara's had, once again, like I said, having to kind of cross that path. So once again, the legends are on their own, so they never really have to worry about that stuff. But it's just interesting. I always think about that when superheroes have to deal with the whole, like, right, keeping my secret identity thing going. So I just think that's kind of an interesting element. I'm curious, is she going to make it so to like maybe Luke can set something up where it's like, oh, Batwoman's flying around while Kate's around, and it's like, wait, you're here. Yeah. Oh, so you're not Batwoman. That's what I'm kind of thinking. Because I think, hasn't, in some continuities, maybe it's even the cartoons, hasn't Bruce done that? Where he's had like someone else, like I could have sworn maybe there was an instance of him getting Superman to pretend to be him to kind of hide the fact is that like, oh, I'm Batman. I think I remember that from like an animated series or something. Maybe it was something Justice League related. I don't remember. It might have even been the Superman cartoon, because I think Batman popped up in that. Regardless, I'm going on a tangent, but it's just I'm curious to see how Kate ends up handling that situation. It might even just be a thing of like, nah, Sophie knows, and just I have to kind of accept that. But once again, we'll see. Then on the other side of the episode is the whole situation with Alice and what was his name again? I'm blanking on it already. I want to say his name was Johnny, but regardless of what it is, we'll just call him Mouse. That'll be easier, because hopefully I'll end up remembering that. Like I said, I'm blanking on his name. What was interesting, his last name came up in his Cartwright, and part of me was like, it sounds familiar, and I'm like, that's not like, and once again, I'm not well versed in DC stuff, but that's not Scarecrow's last name, is it? It's not, because I'm blanking. It's something else. I remember it. It's on the tip of my tongue. It's not Cartwright, but that name seems familiar, and I'm just not sure why. But regardless, because part of me was wondering if that was it, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's something else in the DC universe I'm just not familiar with. But regardless, it's definitely not Scarecrow. I'm thinking about it now. Like I said, it's something else, but I know it's just in the back of my mind. Regardless, it's something I could look up, but if I looked up, in particular, who Mouse really it might be in the comic books and stuff, like, I don't want to look it up just because it might spoil stuff later on, so that's why I'm just keeping it to, like, oh, what could this be and what it is, you know, without being certain about it, because Google's the thing and everything. But regardless, tangent over with. It's really interesting. Obviously, it's like getting Mouse to look like that other dude, which it seems like it's to sneak into Catherine's company, Hamilton, because they're trying to get access to a weapon she has. And it turns out this weapon is a weapon that's powerful enough to pierce the Batsuit, which is interesting because Bruce was working on said thing, which also makes you wonder. The fact is, it's similar things. They're different yet similar. It makes you wonder, was that something maybe Bruce borrowed from them? Or is that something Hamilton took from Wayne Enterprise in some shape or form, considering the fact is Wayne Enterprise is basically shut down? So it makes you, I mean, it's most likely the most likely thing is probably like executives, people at the top of Wayne Enterprise probably went off and started Hamilton, or at very least joined that whole situation. So that might be where all that kind of goes. So like a lot of ideas that were stuff related to Wayne Enterprise probably went over to them, just because Wayne Enterprise was kind of done with the moment Bruce left town. Which also begs the question, well, what was the main reason for getting that weapon in the first place? Because obviously you won't want to kill Batwoman because that's your sister. But obviously Mouse, because the fact of the matter is, it's like, oh, get, Kate out of the way, or Batwoman out of the way. Why don't you want to do anything? The fact is, you don't even want to kill this guy because we don't need him anymore because I'm impersonating him. But it's like the old Alice would do it without hesitation. And she's like, are you questioning me? He's like, the fact of the matter is, Kate is changing you. She's like, no, she's not. Which begs the question, could she be? Like, is there some part of her that is trying to, because of that moment last episode with her dad, even though she stabbed him, she could have killed him, but maybe the whole point is to make him suffer. Once again, it's a sad circumstance, because I don't think they deserve it. They have, I wouldn't even fault them for everything that went down, just because it's like, oh, this evidence proved it. So it's like, why would you fight hardcore evidence? It's like, why would you even think that someone would lie about something like that? When you have medical professionals being like, yeah, this is totally your daughter, so no one would jump to that conclusion, so I'm not even going to fault Kate nor Jacob for that. But regardless, along with all that, I just thought it was kind of interesting how he was just kind of getting all pissy with her, because for him, he felt like he was losing her. It's like, no, I was there for you when Kate wasn't. What has she done for you? She abandoned you, yet you're fighting so hard for her. I even thought it was kind of interesting, and I think it shows you a little bit of Beth, maybe, Alice's personality, where the dude was playing checkers with her, and he was like, no, you can win. He must have known ahead of time he was going to win. He's like, no, you can win. She's like, it's your turn. And he goes, click, clap, click, clap. King me, and then she gets pissed and flips over the board and everything, because I don't think she likes to lose. So that was interesting. But Mouse ends up killing Home Dude in the first place, and it's like, it seems like it ruffled Alice a little bit, so it seems like Mouse is kind of getting a little beyond her control, but she's able to kind of talk him down and go like, the fact is, you are important to me, but the fact of the matter is, so is Kate. We can make it 3 at the table, which he was like, no, it was supposed to be a table for 2, because he's obsessed with, Alice, because Alice has been his friend, because he didn't have anyone besides her. So like, she's literally, and it's kind of an interesting thing. It's something I've talked about before in, my own personal life, making someone your everything, in the sense that like, they hold all your happiness and all your good memories. All his life is associated with her. Like, we don't know 100% what his relationship was like with his dad. We got tidbits of it, but in the grand scheme of things, how he really feels about his dad. Did he love his dad? Does he still love his dad? All that stuff. But obviously, all his affinity goes towards Alice, and he doesn't want to share her. But Alice is like, hey, we're going to give this a try and bring Kate on board. But it's like, if Kate's not on board, then we'll use the laser. But I don't think that's going to be, Alice isn't hoping for that. She doesn't want that. I think she's just saying that to appease Mouse, and also probably make herself believe like, no, I can do this. But it's like, no matter what the circumstances are, that's still your twin, and there's always going to be that connection. So no matter, despite everything, you're still going to want her to be a part of you, because you feel like you're half of her and she's half of you. So very interesting episode. I'm really curious to ultimately see where all this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. I dropped it earlier, but I do need to circle back to like the question I brought up. why are they making that laser? Is it kind of like how Bruce made it, 'cause just in case anyone ever stole a bat suit? Are you making that because you're like, oh, just for military purposes of if anyone ever got the technology that the bat suit was made from? Or is it more so because what if Batman becomes an enemy? Just kind of like, oh, what if Superman became evil? Are we going to be prepared to face that when the time, that type of situation? So we'll ultimately have to wait and see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. And now moving on to this week's episode of Supergirl, a great episode. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, we have the shadow assassin popping up, trying to retrieve Rip-Roar, which, you know, obviously we know is Russell. I immediately was thinking like, okay, so the shadow assassin's there to kill him, but I didn't expect it to be revealed that like, whoa, Andrea is the shadow assassin. Obviously we know she had connection to Leviathan, but at the same time it made you think like maybe she had nothing to do with what happened to Russell because she wasn't connected to all of this. But then it turns out maybe, I don't know. It was really interesting in the grand scheme of things because she goes to the one person she can turn to in this situation, and that's Lena, which obviously Lena is reluctant to help her. And I like what they did in this episode. It gave us a lot of interesting context, actually kind of understanding Lena a little bit more on why she took, you know, Kara's betrayal so hard and, you know, what went down between her and Andrea. Well, it turns out back when they were in boarding school 15 years ago, she told Andrea about this medallion. It was something that was so important to her mom. She looked into the legends of this particular medallion, and so it was kind of like her mom's thing of like, we go together to find it someday. But her mom obviously died, and so that was just something that Lena wanted to get because it was a reminder of her mom. It was kind of like, it was almost like, you know, it's something her mom dreamed about. So in a sense, it was kind of like an obsession of Lena's. Well, then 5 years ago, Lex has got his plans to try and take down Superman, which obviously we learned about those plans last season and everything. Obviously we got a flashback to all of this last season, but then like we got more context to it. Now she wants to try and stop her brother from doing all of this, in her mind trying to save him, while at the same time Andrea is going through stuff with her dad and their company. Interesting enough, her dad is played by the actor who played Avi, plays Avi and Ray Donovan. Also interesting enough, because I'm rewatching Breaking Bad. I still am, because I'm very slow at that. I forgot home dude's name, but he was the dude that Gus was getting revenge against in Breaking Bad. I was like, holy crap, that's interesting, the dude that's tied to Gus's past. Regardless, that whole situation. But it turns out that basically, and we hear reference to Max Lord, which we have not heard reference of him since season 1. He's one of those storylines from season 1 that was just kind of dropped. So I guess it's kind of like a lot of that got retconned, but obviously his existence isn't, but probably like his exact part to play and everything probably been altered, obviously going forward with Supergirl and everything. But regardless, apparently Max Lord was going to make, like, they were going out there with a new phone, and Obsidian was making one, but it turns out Max Lord's phones were going to be like 4 times faster, or at least like the chip inside of them were going to be. And obviously, you know, Andrea's dad was sick, and so he was in a position of like, we were going to lose so much. So for him, you know, he was sick and he was just kind of like, it's not worth living. So I want you to kind of be away from this business. I want you to go out there, start your own thing and flourish. So Lena and Andrea kind of come together because it's a situation of like, Lena needs this medallion because it could be something that could be used to stop Lex from doing what he's doing. So many people would get hurt. And that's the thing. Lena's always been trying to desperately, you know, fix everything, she wants to help people, and so many people would get hurt. So she's hoping to stop her brother by any means. So they go on this excavation, this adventure, and Andrea ends up finding the medallion, but Leviathan, which that guy just randomly pops out of anywhere, which I'm wondering, is he supposed to be Leviathan or is he just an agent? Because it seems like their agents just pop out of anywhere, so they must have superpowers in their own right. So maybe it's a thing of like I brought up before, maybe a little bit of Leviathan is in each one of them, and it makes you wonder, like, Leviathan seems like it has to be like a superpowered person. The question is it an alien? Is it a metahuman? What is Leviathan? Who is Leviathan? But it's like they just pop out of nowhere, because it's like you were in the cave one instance and then you disappear the next. Andrea has to basically, to save her father's life and save their company, she made this deal. She took that medallion and hid it from Lena, which obviously she knows how much that meant to Lena. It's like, I told you what it meant to my mom, so what it means to me now that my mom's gone. But, obviously they kept their friendship because Lena never found out until years later, her and Jack. Because obviously Jack, which is like, yo, good to see your boy Raul Coley. Jack ended up, which is actually kind of sad when we actually think about it, because obviously we know how Jack's story ends, sadly. So it just kind of makes that whole situation even worse. But it's the thing of like, he was there to help Lena when, like, obviously she was, Lex was arrested and just things kind of went down the lane that they did, and he kind of pulled her away from that. But then she found out about Andrea having the medallion, which is like, that's kind of pretty crazy of you to wear it at parties and stuff like that. It's kind of super messed up. Why would you do that? Just keep it on you, but I guess you're wearing a dress suit. You could have kept it in your purse. You didn't have to wear it as a necklace. I guess it's like, oh, I didn't expect to find you here, Lena. I didn't expect you to be in London. I guess if she had known ahead of time, she would have hidden it. But it's like, I don't know, it's a little, even you have to admit it's a little messed up. You're almost kind of flaunting it in a way, but regardless, there's that whole situation ends up playing out, and that right there in itself lends itself to like why Lena, it's a culmination of so much. It's like her brother, she tried to save her brother because there is a part of her that wants to save her family, because there is that part of her, Lex has talked about it, you want to impress me. Like, whether she actually ever admitted or not, Lena always did want Lex's approval more so than anybody. She kind of wanted to be accepted into the family, yet it's that complicated thing of like, you don't want to be a part of the Luthor family, but at the same time you do want to be accepted because that's the only family you have. Sadly for you, your family's filled with megalomaniacs, so that's a whole complicated thing in the sense that, like, because your brother is so obsessed with killing Superman, he's willing to hurt millions of people to do it, so hence why he's the supervillain that he is. But it turns into this whole complicated thing of, because of that, she felt betrayed by her brother. She tried to save him, and lo and behold, all that he did, he was willing. I mean, obviously this is before we even got to all the stuff that went down in season 4. This is still all those years ago. So that on top of Andrea's betrayal and what that meant, and I thought that was kind of interesting because it adds a little more context to Lena and Kara's relationship, because when the time came, because this is insight we never got, because Lena and Kara just became besties, but we kind of find out there was actually bumpy roads because Lena didn't want a friendship, because after being betrayed by her longtime best friend Andrea, that broke her. This is like, I don't want to trust people again. She even left Jack behind, because Jack was like, whoa, you rather, fix the Luthor name than rather be with me, which I'm sure that bothers Lena even more now because of Jack coming back into her life and then kind of losing him the way she did. It kind of turns the whole situation even up more, and it probably makes her hurt even more, because I was so fixated on trying to make the Luthor name better. Like I said, for her, it's like after everything that went down, she needed to do some good. It's just like being betrayed by her best friend, being betrayed by her brother, and just the family name. She needed to do something to restore the Luthor name, to restore herself a little bit, gain back some kind of control, is kind of how I look at it. And so for it to be what it is so fascinating that she would kind of push Kara away, and I was like, oh, that's so interesting to add that context. But obviously, you're not trying to make any friendships because you don't want to be betrayed again. But Kara, being kind of persistent as she is, and being like, Kara talks about the fact is, she kind of, found herself kind of not wanting to trust people either, and she's like, but if it wasn't for, Alex kind of helping me kind of break out of that shell, I would be drowning in it. And I think Lena, that was a moment where, Kara kind of extending that and led to Lena doing that as well, which obviously sadly leads to this situation. But now I'm like, now it makes a little more sense of why Lena feels the way she did, because it was betrayal after betrayal, and then she met Kara and she felt like, oh, everything's good. But now it's like, wait, you've been lying to me this entire time. All it does is just take her back to those huge betrayals, like the largest betrayal she had. Like, Kara became her best friend. It's like the last best friend she had betrayed her and lied to her for years, and Kara did the same thing of keeping such a big secret from me and everything. Would things have been better if she had heard it from Kara rather than her psychopathic brother who did this on purpose? He wanted to have one final laugh against his sister of oh, you thought you won, now you've lost. You've been a loser the entire time and you've never even realized it, because your friends, not just Kara, but everyone that's been in your little circle has actually been lying to you this entire time. So it like I said, it doesn't justify it, but you make her more sympathetic of being like, okay, that Lena's trust is really hard to gain, and the fact is Kara broke down those walls and now they're gotten built up again because of all that. So Lena is willing to help Andrea save, Russell. Obviously she acts as a distraction while Andrea tries to break into the DEO, which really quickly, obviously, like the price to pay for this whole Leviathan thing was like, oh, you be what we make you be. So it's like she becomes an assassin and everything. It turns out the medallion is where the powers come from and everything. And I think it's actually kind of fascinating that in the long run of like, well, one person she ended up killing was a governor, and it says like, oh, he was a climate change denier. So it makes you go like, okay, so they're trying to kill people who are what is your gain is what I'm trying to figure out, because obviously you were going to use Lex Luthor. I guess they were going to try and put him in a position of, because I guess they needed someone to kind of change the world in a sense of like, whether it be wiping out Superman or whether it be wiping out Supergirl, because obviously Supergirl is like the biggest threat to like their world changing plans, I guess, in the long run. So like I think it's a thing of like they're trying to get rid of, like, they want the world to fit I guess it might be a thing of like they're trying to create a utopia, and they're trying to get rid of people that might be considered like, oh, this is a bad person because like, I don't know, maybe it's like a nature, I don't know how to phrase it, like people who are impeding the earth. Maybe this is kind of almost like a naturalist kind of being like Leviathan representing someone of like, let's put the earth first, so we're trying to change the world and to create this utopia, kind of give the world back to the planet or something. It's interesting because everything about connected to the medallion was connected to a serpent, which is interesting because Leviathan is a serpent. Like I said, this is just based on, you know, the mythology I know simply just because of the Final Fantasy games. I've referenced that before and I'm referencing again. I've never really looked into Leviathan's mythology just all on its own, but I'm assuming it's, you know, a serpent and everything. But regardless, it's like, so they have particular reasons why they're targeting certain people, but it's like, why was a tidal wave necessary well, the tsunami that will, or at least the destruction that we're going to call as last episode, and the fact is you were going to even strike down Andrea, is it because, well, no, because she's still obviously working for you, because we know that she killed the person that was inhabited by the alien spider tattoo. So it's like, okay, so it's not like you haven't been doing what they wanted you to do, because obviously that was the most recent thing you've done for them. So it's like, why do that? I guess to pull any, you know, links to Andrea so that no one finds any connection, to make it seem like, oh, if Andrea and Obsidian were being targeted, or maybe that was the point, to make it like, oh, like we did that because we don't care about your business. The fact is we have greater plans, so whatever you do is up to you, sure, but if it gets in the way of our plans, we don't care. You know, it's like your thing is your thing. We made everything happen because apparently like Max Lord's like chip thing had exploded, so like obviously showing you how powerful they are, that they could shift, you know, because obviously, like I said, they're like a world shifting international group, I'd assume. I don't know. I'm just curious what that all is, and obviously I think going forward we're going to definitely be diving into that, because obviously the DEO knows about Leviathan because Russell ended up throwing out their name, which luckily, you know, something they didn't account for was the fact is that because of obviously probably that's also because it's a specific frequency of sorts that John was able to recognize, like, oh, there's a psychic power activated that resembles my brother. So either just because they are siblings, he was able to sense that, or it might just simply because, like, just as a Green Martian in general, he was able to sense such a large psychic wave. So luckily, Alex was able to show up and help deal with that whole situation as well. So that's the whole thing. And sadly, you know, and luckily for Super Hearing, like, you know, Alex was able to call out the car, and Car was able to show up anyway. But sadly, Russell and Andrea got away, and it's like, oh, thank you so much, Lena. And she's like, nope, hold this knife up to your neck, Russell. And it's like, because, you know, Andrea tried to make it clear, like, everything I've ever done has been for my family's sake, saving my father. But, you know, for Lena, it's like, you know how important that was to me. It was the means of stopping my brother, because I think in her mind, it's like, if she had that, nothing would have gone down the way it did. Maybe she could have stopped Lex from being what he became, like him, the road he was going down. She maybe feels like I could have stopped him if I had that, but no. And also, you know how important it was to me. So it's in a personal attack on her and multiple folds. In two different fold, when, you know, Andrea's betrayal attacks on those two lanes of everything. But regardless, And no matter how much Andrea tried to make her understand, like, I did everything, even realizing, like, I already know how much blood is on my hand. There's more blood on my hands than even you can know or even realize. But the fact is, Lena was like, oh, I would never betray you like that. Even though you're literally betraying her right now because you're threatening to kill the man that she loves, even though you claim to want to do no harm. But the fact is, you're willing to go this far and beyond for this medallion. Which Andrea's like, I told you is a curse, but she doesn't care just because it's just kind of like, because it turns out like even bringing Andrea into this whole thing, it's like, why not use her? She betrayed me, so I'm just going to use her, you know. So just like she's using Kara to get what she wants, she used Andrea to get what she wants, hence the whole Catco situation as well. So the plan is on multiple, because like I think it is a situation of being able to hurt Kara is what that was supposed to be, because she knows how important this was, you know, Catco is to both Jimmy and Kara. So I think it was, she hasn't really talked about it like that, but I'm sure it was more of a personal attack of like, she knew how Andrea would run the business. So it was kind of, especially because she kind of floats it in her head of how she could operate a business of being like, oh, because it also turns out the tech person behind all this was like Russell. So his very inventions, I guess, were being used against him. Because he ended up discovering what Andrea was up to. So he was a loose end and they were trying to deal with him. But Andrea was like, he can be useful. And it seems like Russell let what happened to him because he knows like, hey, this is about, you know, it's like you're trying to protect me. And obviously I care about you. So whatever I have to do to protect you, lo and behold, I'm fine with it. So there's that circumstance. But, you know, sadly, when Andrea and Russell were about to leave, he ends up getting killed because it's like no matter where you run, there's no escaping us. He's already a loose end, and to kind of make it cemented like you have nothing and nowhere to hold on to. The last ties to who you were are gone. Even suggesting that the medallion activated activated the power, but she doesn't need the medallion to activate it anymore because it's like that medallion drew out your darkness. There was already that darkness in you, and so. Which actually kind of, you know, it's sad in the long run to know that that's a manifestation of who you are potentially, or at least that's what they're claiming. So it's like, you belong to us, so there's no escaping. So she's still stuck here, and the man that she loves, all that she's done was all, you know, more recently, everything she's done was for his sake. It was trying to run away with him, but it's like, there is no escaping Leviathan. Just like Eve couldn't escape Leviathan, and obviously that's all going to lead them back to Lena's doorstep. They've definitely got an eye on Lena. They probably just haven't reached out yet, but I think we're going to get to that point soon enough. But Lena's fine with the medallion not having the special features anymore. So it's like, you know what I'm going to do instead? Just run, okay, the markings spell out Leviathan. So it's like, okay, Hope, look into Eve's memories and find out whatever you can about this Leviathan. So we've got two different groups, Hope and Lena on one front and the DEO on the next. And obviously Kara telling William that your friend is like, hey, he didn't do all this because he wanted to, like he was being forced to, but now William's probably going to end up finding out like, oh, his best friend's dead, and everyone's going to think the Shadow Assassin did it, but it turned out not to be the case. And I'm curious what Lena's going to think, because it's like, oh, he's dead now. Oh, I'm wondering like, oh, like the fact of the matter is, in your own way, you did betray him because you didn't help them out and everything. Like, I don't know. It's a complicated thing. I mean, to be fair, Lena should understand too. She was willing to try and do whatever she could for family in a sense too. Like obviously it was about helping other people too, but she even talked about trying to save her brother with the whole medallion thing. And you know, Andrea betrayed you, yeah, but she was kind of basically doing the same thing, trying to look after her father and everything. So, which they're obviously blackmailing him because all those years ago they were like, hey, if you don't do what we ask you to, there's going to be some proof that comes up about your dad doing some insider trading and stuff like that. So to basically implode everything, even pushing him to that, it could even potentially push him towards like maybe even considering to kind of, you know, kill himself again, you know, and obviously destroy the Obsidian business and all that. So it's like, what we gave you, we can just as easily take away, you know. So, and very, very interesting lane of events. And like I said, I just like the context that it kind of gives us overall with Andrea's past and understanding Lena a little bit more, and why, adding that context of why she took this whole Kara thing as personal as she did. Like, you know, it's like, okay, people be pissed at it, but why she has such a vendetta, you know? And it's, and once again, kind of mirror, and I think that might be what they're setting up. And that's something I've talked about before, like her desperate need to like, oh, I'm trying to fix people and make them better. you're definitely going down the lane of your brother. I think that's why they're trying to show that mirror image of like your obsession with Supergirl, you know, your obsession with trying to fix people and stuff like that. It's kind of built upon your obsession of Supergirl, which is the same thing that your brother. So it's like it's showing that, you know, sadly that Luther gene is definitely kicking in, and I think she's just going to kind of sadly repeat history like when it comes to her brother. So I am very interested to ultimately see where all this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. And now moving on to this week's episode of The Walking Dead. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Let's start this off with everything that happened with Negan, which was really interesting. Probably some of my favorite parts of the episode. Just like the fact of the matter is he's getting kind of taken to Alpha and everything. And Negan being who Negan is, he can never shut his damn mouth. He's always kind of saying something smart. And he's talking about the fact is like, I want to be one of you guys. The fact is, you know, the uniforms and everything. And the fact is even asking if basically they go commando underneath all of that, you know, down below and stuff like that, which Beta doesn't appreciate it because he's like, I should like slit your throat right now. It's actually kind of interesting because even Negan kind of throws it out there of like, yeah, I was locked up in a prison by them for 8 years, so enemy of my enemy, right? The fact of the matter is he's like, I'll tell you everything you want to know about them. And I'm like, that's so interesting because this sets up an interesting precedent that's never happened in The Walking Dead. Villains meeting villains. Like, you can make the argument, like, certain people might draft villains in, but, like, he was a previous... Because most previous villains end up dead. Whether it be, like, Shane going a little villainous, whether it be the governor... Because he's the only villain that went away and came back. But it was still him. But, like, now it's, like, Negan came... It's borderline a good guy, but he's in his own lane. But for him to meet Alpha is so interesting because that's never happened in The Walking Dead where the antagonists meet. Because there's typically, because I mean, with the way the story's structured, it's not really many antagonists you won't actually meet over the course of the series. I guess you can make the argument, it's like, I mean, technically, I'm about to say Maggie kind of became a bit of an antagonist for a little, you know, so it's really hard to kind of judge that, but there's leeway with it. It's just, I just thought it kind of sets a very interesting precedent in the show. But that's just my, how I see it. But he kind of gets brought before Alpha, which, well, not directly, but Beta's kind of like, we shouldn't trust him, we should go ahead and kill him. But Alpha is like, the fact of the matter is, he should be, if he proves himself worthy, he'll be one of us. But if he's not, then, you know, then I will kill him. Which Beta's kind of like, he's a threat. And she's like, a threat to who? Alpha or Beta? She's asking, is it that time where the Beta rises to become the Alpha, which I guess that also speaks volumes because she talks about the fact is, lately you've been talking back a lot, basically like questioning everything I'm doing. I just find that kind of interesting, but it's like, even so, I think he does fear and respect her. You know, it is that complicated thing, you know, the whole thing of, is it better to be feared or loved? It's hard to say in their dynamic what it is. Does he stay out of obligation because he loves her or because he respects her? Is it both? You know, I'm curious what that is. Because despite everything, despite the whole finding out, oh, Lydia's still alive, seeing that vulnerable side of her, he still kind of is like, no, I'll follow you to the end. So I guess she was able to reach something, like she will always have a special place in his heart type of thing, because you gave me new purpose. You gave me a new mission, a new life. I was reborn as Betas, you know? I guess like he owes everything that he is to her. So it's like, what I have is yours forever. So I guess he's not willing to cross that line of kind of deciding like, oh, I'm gonna be the leader. Maybe not yet at the very least. And I love Negan's perspective on the fact is of like, oh yeah, I saw that whole Negan thing. That was kind of impressive. He's like, I mean, don't get me wrong. And the fact is, he was like, I'm kind of behind that because it's like, hey, I've had people who kneel down before me too, so I know how that feels. But he's like, I've never kneeled to no one. And so he kind of gets put through the ringer. They have him digging a hole and everything. And I love it's almost like this little comedic lightheartedness to the episode where basically it's almost kind of a pissing contest between Negan and Beta, because Beta, like Negan skins like an animal and puts the skin up to dry, and then Beta pulls up an even bigger pound of flesh, and it's like Negan's trying to adjust his to make it seem more flashy than it is. Negan's tired himself out trying to drag bodies over. He dragged one of them over there at a time, and then here comes Beta walking over, dropping two and going back for more. And I just love that. Negan kind of not getting respected because everyone's got like proper weapons, and he's got a little pocket knife. The disrespect. And even the fact is, it's like, oh, he wants to get some of the food, but it's like, oh, like you have Beta being like, the fact of the matter is you're not going to get any because you're not part of you don't get to eat because you're not one of us. And Negan just kind of accepted and went over. And one of the guys that was nearby was it almost seemed interesting because Negan just seems so out of place. Yeah, he's almost working with this crew because like they take down that boar or pig or whatever together. Then they're like filling up the hole together. And then after the job was done, they stood there like a crew or something. And it was kind of interesting. I mean, to be fair, I guess you can almost make the argument this is Negan kind of putting himself back in that position of like, well, Brandon last episode talked about, oh, Negan, like, oh, the savior's this, savior that. So maybe it kind of sparked something inside of Negan where it's like, all right, it kept me locked up. I became someone else. Maybe it's time to go back to the good old me. Maybe killing Brandon made him go like, you know what? He flexed those Negan muscles, you know, that he hadn't flexed in a while, being, you know, that particular Negan, that I think maybe it set him in motion. I mean, I guess you could make the argument he was always going to be already there because of the whole Aaron thing, because he was sitting in the darkness because Aaron couldn't see, but he didn't let Aaron know until the time came. I think that good nature that he was kind of building up was like, all right, screw it, I'll save the bastard. Or maybe it was part of the plan, you know, to make him a little indebted to you, make things sway a little more your side in the future, because if you go back, and if Aaron's dead, they were going to blame you for it, and so it's not like you can actually go back, because, you know, he tried to leave before, but didn't really have anywhere left to go, so regardless, it was just interesting circumstances he finds himself in. But as he's, you know, as they're talking and stuff like that, he's talking about he's basically ready to be one of them and stuff like that, which Beta was like, no, you're never going to be one of us, you're too weak, and you're too loud, and you've got too much ego. He's like, it's not really ego but what if I really am just that awesome? I'm like, I love how narcissistic you are. I love it. But it turns into that thing of like, he's like, you know, I came here for Alpha, not for you. So the fact of the matter is, I'm not going anywhere. And Beta's like, you're right, you're not going anywhere. And he kills someone. I'm assuming that's the guy who gave him food. And then I love Negan being like, wait, did you just tell a joke? I'd be more impressed if I wasn't super pissed off right now. And obviously, Negan's surrounded by walkers, and all of a sudden, you know, it cuts to like later on, Beta's there with Alpha being like, he was weak, he had to die, and he's like, where's my skin suit? The fact of the matter is, showing up, and he's like, you know, whatever you need, everything that I have is yours, and kind of bows before Alpha, which he bows to no one under no circumstances, which is kind of interesting when you think about it in the grand scheme of things, because, you know, once again, he made people bow to him, not just the saviors, but even like, you know, he had everyone on their hands and he had everyone on their knees, you know, back in season 6's finale / season 7's premiere, where before he ended up killing everyone, well, you know, Abraham and Glenn. So it's just interesting to kind of see it, like, even after all that big speech, or like he bows to no one. But the big question becomes, is he sincere about this, or is this some long con into taking her down? Or is this some even longer con to replace her? I think Beta better watch his back, because eventually Negan's going to either kill him or put himself in such a favorable position that Alpha decides to kill Beta. It's like, I want you to be my new Beta. Maybe, maybe not. It's going to be interesting to see where things kind of go, because Beta doesn't seem that happy, because he's always been Alpha's right-hand person. We've seen that they've been together for a very long time. They've been there at the start. Well, once Alpha made her shift into becoming Alpha, was in the process of becoming Alpha, she met him, or her and Lydia did. So, which is interesting when you actually think about it, because like Negan kind of befriended Lydia, and now he's befriending her mom. So I'm like, I don't know. I'm curious to see where things kind of go on that front. What we really, you know, what's waiting in store for us. So I just thought that was kind of fascinating. Eugene's situation is actually kind of sad, because it seems like he's basically lonely, because obviously he's at Hilltop, but he's not really close to anyone in Hilltop. All the people he's closest to is Alexandria, because that's the group he knows. I mean, obviously there's people in Hilltop he knows, but the people he has the most rhetoric with, the best relationship with, is Rosita, because him and Rosita, obviously, like, it was him and Abraham for such a long time. So, I mean, there's obviously the back and forth, because obviously he likes her. And I think on some level, like, she says it will never be like that, but I think there is a part of Rosita that does like him, because I think more so than almost like there's a part of her that kind of leans on him a little bit, I guess, because of just everything that they've been through, you know? So because I think I don't know, maybe it is just because she does look at him as kind of like a best friend, so whereas he looks at her as someone that basically he's in love with, so there's that whole complicated situation. But it was like Jerry's wife, I believe, that had come to see him, and it's like, oh, he was like, oh, you can always stay, you know, if you ever want to test this radio out or whatever. And she's like, yeah, sure. And like I said, he's lonely because he doesn't really have anyone to connect with. I don't think, like I said, I just don't think Hilltop, like, if you can make the argument at the very least, besides Rosita, at least Alexandria is a core of people he knows. Probably Hilltop isn't people, because Hilltop contains, well, people from Hilltop and some people from Alexandria, but also a lot of people from the kingdom as well, so I'm sure that makes it a little, you know, so. But what's interesting, though, is he gets to talking with Rosita a little bit, and you see him kind of light up, and you see Rosita kind of light up a little bit, even though, despite how she's feeling and stuff like that, she's like, you know, I'll call you later this afternoon or something, and he's like, I'd really like that, obviously, you know, so I just thought that was kind of an interesting situation. But then later on, he can't get in contact with her, so he's, you know, adjusting the radio, and he gets in contact with someone else, and they start having a back and forth and everything. And she wants to kind of cut it off later on because it's like, oh, they have so much fun. They actually, turns out they have a lot in common and stuff like that. But then it gets to the point where it's like, she doesn't want to tell him too much. She doesn't want to continue things because it's like, you might be dangerous, but also you shouldn't be too trusting of me because I might be dangerous, which, you know, I mean, that to me just feels a little, I mean, I feel like any normal person wouldn't necessarily say that, but I mean, you could make the argument. It's like, yeah, like, you know, we want to keep, you know, safe. I want to make sure, you know, everything's okay. I don't want to cause any problems or any betrayals or anything like that. But it just seems interesting. It just seems like you went out of your way to kind of drop that little nugget. So it could be a thing of like trying to weave him in because, you know, maybe she has the best of intentions. Maybe she doesn't. You never know with these type of situations. But Eugene kind of puts himself out there because, like I said, I think he is lonely. And if he can't, you know, find that kinship with Rosita, he'll find it somewhere else, and that finding it somewhere else might ultimately be their undoing. That depends on how much talking Eugene does, because he wants to keep this going, and she's like, yeah, but if I hear anyone else on the radio, I'll cut ties because I'll know that you're not who I think you are, but I think you are a good person, so I'm willing to keep this conversation going, but we'll keep it between us, which is like, yeah, you're very trusting, Eugene, because there's no guarantee she's keeping it to herself, because the lone pauses, it might be her being like, all right, I got him hook, line, and sinker, and we're going to find out who they are, where they are, and take them, you know, that might be an issue. It might even be something to consider. Remember, because you have Alpha telling Gamma to like, oh, set things up in a sense of like, you need to be willing to wear another mask. Now, I'm wondering, because obviously that seemed like that was specifically tied to Aaron, whatever that thing between Aaron and Gamma ends up being, because it was like, you showing her kindness was kind of interesting, but maybe he's trying to sway her to be away, just like Lydia was kind of swayed, maybe they're trying to sway Gamma, which might be a little easier than they think, because she is kind of conflicted, because the whole, well, I did kill my sister, you know, the only family I had for Alpha, you know, and it's just like, obviously that hasn't sat well with her, but, you know, so, you know, we'll see in the long run what ends up happening, but part of me wonders, could that be like, could that be Gamma on the radio? But I feel like Alpha and them wouldn't do that. But you never know. It could be some other group, whatever the case may be. Because that was something that was set up at the end of the season, wasn't it? Because it was the whole thing of like, oh, who's on the radio at the end of the season. So this might be tied into that, whatever it is. But I just can't help, you know, feel like the shoe is going to drop when it comes to this whole, you know, other situation. Like I said, in the grand scheme of things, we'll see. But that's where my mindset is. Now, on the other side of things, there is the thing of everyone being sick. Sadiq is back in Alexandria. Obviously, you know, Dante being kind of like I don't know, like he has this charming scumminess to him because he just says that, because the way he's flirting with that lady, you know, and it's like, oh, the fact is, I thought we'd make a good couple and stuff like that. Like, oh, you up? And she's like, oh yeah, because I'm faking all this vomit to come see you. He's like, aren't you? And then Sadiq was like, yeah, we need to come up with boundaries, because he was getting all up in his daughter's face. Oh, good. It didn't make it. He's like, all right. And he's like, oh, you could, if you need me to, you can send Rosita my way so I can make sure everything's kind of, I forgot what it was. To me, it kind of almost felt like a, whoa, like, hold your brakes, pump the brakes, don't talk about my baby mama like that, or something. I don't know, that's how I kind of took it. But Dante was like, right, boundaries and stuff like that. But it does seem like things are getting worse, because Rosita seemed like she was getting better, but then she got worse. And then it seems like more, because at first it was like 6 or 7 people, but then it's like there's more and more people. And obviously Sadiq is kind of like, the fact of the matter is, you should have called me immediately. Because I think for Sadiq, he's kind of spiraling, because it's like, it's still him, dealing with the fact is I couldn't save everyone when it came to the Whisperers. So he feels like in his circumstances, he can't, like, if there's a big problem like this, it's like, I got to step in. I've got to be the one. I got to know ahead of time because he needs something he can fix, because that's something he couldn't do about. He just happened to be the one. Lucky him, and I mean that in the sense that he feels like, oh yeah, lucky me that I got to be the one that survived, because it's just the way people look at him and just dealing with all that. Like I said, the PTSD of it all makes it so that, he's so guilt-ridden about it that I think for him, he's so desperate for basically a win. He needs to make sure everything's okay. So if anything problem comes up, especially because this problem also involves Rosita, so it's like, you should have let me know ahead of time. So he kind of snaps at Dante, but he kind of apologizes to it later on. It's like, which Dante kind of completely understands, I think, because of what he's going through, because Dante had talked about like his own PTSD situation. So I think for Dante, he created this kind of persona of like, oh yeah, like we're gods and stuff like that. He comes off a little dickish and stuff like that, but I think it's a front to kind of hide what he's probably dealing with underneath too. It's meant to be suave and confident to kind of let people, think like, oh, everything's okay. But I think it is just a bit of a mask, so there's that. But what's interesting too is we see the whole Sadiq situation get worse, because we see Sadiq is with this baby, but then like as he closes his eyes, he wakes up and he's near the window. I was like, whoa, what the hell? So that means he's sleepwalking too. So whatever this situation is, it's getting worse. And if Sadiq doesn't deal with it, it's going to have catastrophic, because I was thinking it was going to be a situation of he's going to wake up somewhere and it's like, where's the baby? Where's the baby? Oh my God. But luckily the baby was in his hands, but that doesn't mean we're not going to circle back to a situation where it's going to be like, wait, I lost a lot of time. Like, who knows? I mean, for one, who knows how long he was sleepwalking? It was still nighttime or whatever, but still, like, it could have been 30 minutes, could have been an hour. You never know. Maybe just a handful of minutes, but it was enough time for him to go to his place to up there. So we'll see kind of where things kind of go on that front. But on the other side of things, there's the whole situation with Daryl and Carol. Obviously, she was trying to sneak off, and it's like, oh, I'm looking for Negan. And he's like, yeah. Daryl's like, I'll come along. Which he's not stupid. He's like, you say you're out here looking for Negan, but you're not. Like, what are you really out here for? And she's like, all right, I'm looking for the Horde, because if they can find the Horde and destroy it, they can cripple the Whisperers, because that's their biggest weapon, is that they can hide themselves amongst their guardians. And especially if they have such a large amassing army as we know that they do, it's like they could kind of take us out at any time. But if we do this, we can cripple them to the point that we can reduce their numbers to just the Whisperers, and then we can take them out. It's Carol's plan. At the very least, it seems like it. But Daryl knows. It's like, the fact is, Carol hands him, like, it's like they're having a whole conversation. I even love that whole thing of like them throwing stuff at the can, and he gets it to jiggle a little bit, and she's like, oh, that doesn't count. He's like, what are you talking about? She's like, you're supposed to knock the can over, not just kiss it. And he's like, you are such a sore loser, And I love her being like, oh, you're the one with the crossbow and everything, yet you're basically saying his aim is shit. I love it. But her being suspicious about him, like when he tried to go to her bag for food, and she's like, no, I got it. So it's like, what are you hiding? He tries to go through her bag, but she doesn't have it. He couldn't find anything. So it's like, you brought a gun, didn't you? And she's like, I didn't have any ammo. But it's like, there's plenty of ammo left, like in the storeroom. So, because he's still thinking like, you're still gunning for Alpha, whether you want to admit it or not. Because the thing for Daryl is like, because obviously she wants to go into the territory and kind of check things out, more so about the Horde, but it's like, that's complete and utter BS. I know it is. But for him, it's like, if we do this, there's going to be ramifications for everyone else, which for her, it's like, they're already paying whether we're doing something or not. Whether we cross the line or not, people are already suffering. Obviously, these attacks and everything that happened at Hilltop with the tree, which we now do know for sure that was the Whisperers and everything. So it's kind of like, we're damned if we do, damned if we don't type of thing. But I think, that it's, I believe that's Daryl speaking from experience, because when he acted when he shouldn't have, someone else paid the price. Rather than him being the one that died, Glenn died because of him. So I think, that's something that kind of sticks in his mind. And I think for him, it's like, I think you might be forgetting that. You're so clouded by your own revenge that you forget, like, that she doesn't remember that moment, So, like he does. But especially on such a large scale, because at the same time, it's like, every time, I mean, and that's just that situation with Negan. Obviously, it's a lot worse in this case with Alpha, because it's like, we don't have what it takes to go up against an entire army she has. Not just her and the Whisperers, which that's already bad enough hidden amongst the Guardians, the Walkers. But on top of that, they have the numbers that they have when it comes to the Walkers. They have their horde. And, that could be disastrous for everyone. But like I said, Carol is so dead set. She's basically saying she's doing this for everyone else. But you're saying that you're doing it for everyone else. But in actuality, you're doing it because you want Alpha dead. That's all you can focus on. And it's not like killing her is going to make anything better. You're still just going to be as broken on the inside. But it's like, if that's all you have going for you, you can't see beyond that, That's a hard lesson a lot of people have had to learn. And obviously when they go sneaking in, I thought it was kind of pretty impressive, the whole, because once again, it's something they haven't done in a long time. I think the last time that happened was season 6, right? It was the lady that Rick was in a relationship with. Her youngest got eaten, and then she got eaten, and the kid ended up shooting Carl because of it, blaming Rick for everything. I think that's the last time we saw people cover themselves in, but maybe they've done it more recently, but I feel like that's the last time I vividly remember, because I know Carol was doing it for a while, like in season 4 to 5 or whatever. I think so, before she ended up rejoining the group. Regardless, seeing Daryl do that was kind of interesting, because I was like, okay. And obviously the Whisperers and the Walkers were looking for them. When he comes back, Carol's got someone. He's like, wait, this was your plan the entire time? She's like, no. It just, the circumstances happened. He saw me, but then it's like, you got zip ties. They weren't in your bag. It's like, I guess you didn't look hard enough. It's like, you must have put them on yourself at some point when Daryl wasn't looking. So that shows, once again, it's like, she's talking about the fact is they can use him for information, but it's like, there's not that many Whisperers, so they're going to notice when one of them goes missing, and so now this is just going to make situations worse, because the whole point was to make it so they wouldn't know that we were there. But we'll see. You better hope he was the only one that was around, because he was, I'd assume he was, because I was about to say, if someone else was kind of with him and was like, I guess he had to be the only one there, because I was like, why else would you take a chance like that? Because word would get back to Alpha if one of her Whisperers went missing, and they regarded like someone else was there gathering up walkers with him. But so obviously Daryl, because Daryl was like, yep, this from the beginning, he was like, this is something stupid, but if it's going to be something stupid, it might as well just be the two of us doing this something stupid. So we'll see in the grand scheme of things what everyone else's reaction is going to be to this. It might be the thing that Carol's like, all right, we're going to keep this a secret, which Daryl might not be too keen about. Like I said, I'm sure everyone's not going to be too keen. Well, because they're going to be going back to, I forgot, they are in back at Alexandria, I believe. What was also interesting too, there was the whole conversation about Carol was talking about, how Ezekiel was like, Daryl was like, Ezekiel, is doing good and everything. And then it's like, how about Connie? And it's like, oh, she's good. It's like, oh, what about that? And he's like, what? And she's kind of giving a look like, yeah, what about you and Connie? And I'm like, yeah, other people started to notice Daryl. But I loved him being like, no, it's not like that. She's like, why isn't it? And I think for him, because of the way everything is, because you never know, because he's seen it so much. He saw it with Maggie losing Glenn. He saw it, with what, is going on between Ezekiel and Carol, and, seeing what Michonne had to go through, losing Rick, now she has to take care of RJ and, Judith on her own. Luckily, she has an entire community to kind of back her up with, but still, I think for him, it's that thing of, there's basically no guarantees, getting close to someone, all it's going to do is end up, you're going to lose people. Hell, he lost his brother. So there's that level of things going down in this world where, they've lost so much. And I think for him, it's almost like there's no point to starting something like that just to kind of end up losing someone. Either I'm going to die or she will. So, and that's a hard thing to carry in this world. So might as well just keep it where things are. But I'm curious to see whether he'll kind of take her advice, because it's like, the fact is that we don't know for certain with certain things. So Carol's kind of like, take this opportunity while you have it, because we all kind of need somebody, throughout all of this. So we'll see whether Daryl kind of does anything, because I completely forgot to talk about it last episode, but there was the whole thing about Connie being like, keeping because it's like Kelly and Magnus and everything are her family, but it's like you, it kind of points to Daryl are family too, and I'm like, the feels. So it's gonna be interesting to see ultimately where everything ends up taking us with all of that. And now moving on to this week's episode of Watchmen. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. First and foremost, there's that whole situation at the beginning I think was kind of fascinating. About like, you had that husband and wife and they're running this farm and everything. And then we get our introduction to Lady True, who shows up at their place and it's like, oh, here's a 3-minute timer, and the fact of the matter is, whoa, don't interrupt me, I've got a lot of important stuff to say. Basically, she wants to buy their property. I wonder why. And I love the whole thing of correcting him. It's like, you're a billionaire. She's like, no, I'm a trillionaire, and I do come out, but only when it's very important. And for the next 3 minutes, you're the most important people in the world. But like, why is that? I guess it's for whatever she's building, which you're like, it's like, that tower, or rather clock she's building. It's like, what does it do? It tells time, but it's like, okay. Beyond that, like, what the hell is that all about? Well, whatever. But it's like, why is that property in particular so important? Even to the point, she doesn't give them money. She gives them what they want, and a legacy, because their legacy is going to die with them. Because family, legacy is within the family. It's not about the land you own or whatever. So like, as long as you have children, your legacy can continue on. And she gives them a child. She prepared one beforehand. It's like, yeah, biologically this is your child, which makes me wonder, in any shape or form, does that tie into the Ozymandias, Adrian side of things, which we'll kind of circle back to. Well, we'll go ahead and jump to that point. The fact of the matter is, like, there are like clone babies, which that just looks kind of disturbing. Just like, see, because for him, he's looking at one's like, nope, kind of like, that's defective. Hop it back, throw it back in the water. So are those connected or not? Like, are those failed attempts to like make people or whatever? Or is that whatever he is that like the game master or whatever who's looking after him? Like, is someone else there? Like, I'm curious. That might, because like, Lady True has facilities all over the place, so wherever he is, that could be run off from another area, because he says, I'm your master, but I'm not the one who created you. Because the fact of the matter is, you're going to make something, make them with purpose, but you two are purposeless, Miss Crookshank and Mr. Phillips being, So it's like, whoever's creations that is, I guess he's like, well, there's an endless supply here, so he fishes them up, and then using his own technology ends up rapidly aging them into, Mr. Phillip and Mrs. Crookshank. So I wonder, are those two things connected? Maybe, maybe not. But then there's that incident where it's like at the end, it's like something comes flying out of the sky, which I'm like, because it seems like this episode, timeline-wise, is all over the place. It's bouncing between different points, because it seems like that, I would assuming that was supposed to be like Judd going down in Archie in the first episode, like when they're fighting the cavalry. I think that's supposed to be that scene, or is that something else? Because it's like, oh, what was that? And she's like, it's mine. I'd assume that was that, not unless we're seeing the other side of things, and that being Angela's car, which we'll get to in a second. I don't think it was, but I could be wrong. It might have just been like, nope, that was Angela's car for sure. So we'll see. Which, speaking of Angela, she's trying to cover up all this stuff connected to Will. She cleans the place, gets rid of all the eggs, cuts down his wheelchair to kind of, so there's no ties to him that would lead Blake to her. She breaks into the cultural thing to kind of find out about her family. And I was mistaken, because I'm not a history buff, I think I didn't remember the fact that Germany was tied to World War I, because it should have been obvious, because like everything that went down in Tulsa with, what was it called? Wasn't it called the Black Market Massacre? I think that's what it was called. That whole situation happened in 21. Obviously, World War II doesn't happen until like the late 1930s, early 1940s. Early to mid 1940s. So of course the timeline went. So it's like I just didn't. I guess it just didn't click in my head to think like, right, like I think I assumed it was World War II and everything, which is interesting considering like Germany's trying to like convince. And I guess maybe that was the whole point, that Germany's trying to convince Black people that like, oh, at least in Germany you'll be treated better than you are in America. But to be fair, it's like, well, it's kind of ironic considering like, that's one of the groups Nazis in particular Hitler wasn't too fond of. It's just interesting when you think about it in the grand scheme of things. And now that I'm sitting here thinking about it, it's fairly interesting. But regardless of all of that, Angela kind of looks at her family tree. I'm curious about why, like, she looks at her dad's side of things, but I guess it's because, like, he's the one that's in front of her. Well, because that, Will is her dad's dad, but I guess it's like she's not going to touch her mom's side of the family. It makes you wonder, is there just nothing important on that side, or is there going to be something important later on? Regardless, there's actually no pictures of Will because I guess he scrubbed his identity from any records. But then we go back to his parents and everything. So it's like, which obviously it's like, you wanted me to learn about you, now I did. Now leave me the fuck alone, because all you've done, like the moment you've entered my life, because I think for Angela, she never really wanted to look too much into her family tree, because I guess it's like the past of the past. They're not around, not much to do about it. I mean, I wonder how much she actually even knows about her own parents, because it's like, oh, she looks up her dad, it's like, oh, his name's Marcus Abar, but beyond that, she doesn't look too much into him because she's focusing on trying to learn about Will and everything. So it's like, but I know about you now, just leave me alone. You, like, the past is a past, and you just come and exploded my life. You killed someone that was important to me, while also revealing something interesting about said important person to me. And then lo and behold, I love that it cuts together with like, oh, she's literally nearby when the car is being dropped on Lori. And it's like, and I love the alarms going off, and she, like, Angela just casually walks over, gets her other key, and turns off the alarm. It's like, oh, this is your car? Yep. Oh, wow, it was stolen, which I guess she must have, like, filed a report, which is smart. I wouldn't have even thought of, like, right, you would probably want to do that just in case it ever shows up later on. No one's asking questions like, well, why didn't you put in a report about your car being missing? So it's like, even before this whole Lori thing came up, she covers her bases pretty well, showing you that she is kind of on top of this shit. So that's actually pretty dope. Then there's also her getting rid of the evidence of, like, Will's chair, but then, like, there's some vigilante dude watching her. She's running after him, and I love that he's, like, pouring shit on himself. I'm like, what is he doing? And then he, like, slides into the sewers. I'm like, that was actually pretty dope, but what the fuck? And even she's like, the fuck? So at least someone witnessed her throwing away some stuff, so that must mean someone's watching her. I mean, obviously, like, he might be a vigilante. We don't really know too much about, like, what he's really... like, what that's about. Like, I don't know whether he's just, like, keeping an eye on her. Maybe someone told him to keep an eye on her. Like, what the hell that whole thing is. What you mean? Like, they make a point of it, so it's not like it's not going to be anything. But I'm curious to find out what that's all about, or whether, I mean, it's not like he knew what was in the bag. But the fact is, like, you have a cop, throwing away something in a bag very shadily. It's like, yeah, that's, something's got to be up. I wouldn't be too surprised if he ends up being the one kind of following that later on. Like I said, you just kind of get the instinct. I mean, I wouldn't know if Laura would go through the trouble of getting a vigilante to keep an eye on Angela, because this way I don't have to keep an eye on her. Like, maybe she, but it may be interesting because it's like, you're so anti-vigilante, would you go through the trouble of doing that? Maybe it's like, oh, you do this for me, I won't bust you for being a vigilante. Maybe not. We'll see. I did like the whole situation with Glass where Angela went to visit him, and apparently, like, I guess he stays in his little bunker just in case, like, shit ever hits the fan when, like, if another giant squid comes. Is it a squid or it's a squid? I was about to say, is it a squid or octopus? It's like, no, it's definitely a squid. And in case another big one comes, but it's like, the alarm stopped. So he goes out there, he takes a picture. So basically those things live about 60 seconds before they completely dissolve, which he also kind of feels bad for him, because it's like, oh, poor bastards. They literally fall into our dimension and they're just as confused as us. And they spend their entire life here, that 60 seconds before they dissolve, just dying. He's like, which, Angela is like, you're fucking weird, which he's like, even you are smart enough to recognize the hypocrisy, and you calling me fucking weird. So, and then there's a whole back and forth. And I love that whole thing of, like, did you know that Judd was a racist? He was a white man in Oklahoma. And then it hands him the hood, and it's like, oh, okay, so he's racist, but this is next level racist. But it's like, his dad was a lawman, so maybe it was a souvenir, maybe it was his. So does that mean he was cavalry? I don't know. It's like, okay, so so I'm supposed to be hiding this from the FBI lady. You're supposed to be hiding this from the FBI lady. All right, but be careful. She's extremely weird, which, yes, she is. Like I said, I really like, and I like what they're setting up between Lori and Angela, that back and forth, it's almost like a buddy comedy in a sense, just like the back and forth that they have, because it's like, it's like, oh, like that car ride and everything, and it's like, why are you so interested in my car going missing? It's like, well, someone I used to, my ex used to kind of, run his mouth about stuff like that. What was it, like thermodynamic miracles? It's like, what does that mean? It's all connected, man. I love that being a thing, and it's just kind of like, so why do you because obviously, people wear masks to hide the pain, to protect themselves from the pain, from trauma. And she's like, I use this to protect myself. And Lori's like, yes, from the pain. It's almost like, don't you see, we're going in circles there. We're saying the same exact thing. And it's like, oh, so what about your family? Didn't know my parents. They died when I was little. It's like, oh, okay. The fact of the matter is, it's like, why do you dress up like a nun? Were your parents murdered by nuns, or were you taken in after your parents were murdered? And she's looking at her like, what? And she's like, what? I'm just curious. And it's like, what makes you an expert on it? It's like, oh, Petey, tell it. Basically, Petey, tell her who I am. And then Petey's like, are you sure? And she's like, yeah. And it's like, all right. Her dad was the comedian, and her mom was Silk Spectre. And then Angela, and I like that, be like, from the Minutemen show, which Petey was like, what was his exact words? Basically saying that was a horrible show, just because it's full of so many historical inaccuracy, because let's not forget, PD is like the historic nut job, with that stuff. But I also think you can it's a very meta thing of just kind of like a superhero TV show, of referencing a superhero TV show within it. I think that's kind of interesting. Like I said, because it just like, it seems like they almost have like I keep bringing up the Black Freighter, I think that's what it's called, storyline from the comic books. Once again, I'm not familiar with the comic books, but that's one of like the key things I know. That storyline was completely absent from the movie, but it was like a comic book within a comic book thing, and I think that's what the Minuteman TV show is supposed to reflect. And so it's just kind of interesting, but I just think like it's a meta level thing. I also think it's interesting that it's almost like, oh, she only knows about, to be fair, that was years and years and years ago. To be fair, well, not just more than 30 years ago, so it's like super old school. So of course Angela probably wouldn't know about it, the whole situation. It is interesting because we ended up finding out, the fact is, like, it's like her father William was a cop, and even she's like, wait, he was a cop? Back in the 40s and 50s, and then he retired and just disappeared, which is interesting, because if he's a cop, why isn't there any like too many records? Why isn't there like a file on record, a picture of him? Because the only picture of him that exists is in that ancestral database, which I didn't even talk about that. I like how that's done. Like, you get an acorn, you plant it, and it literally gives you a virtual family tree to kind of touch and look at. I was like, that's actually pretty dope way to kind of scientifically show that. That's actually pretty awesome. But I just think it's interesting that the only picture of him that exists on file is of him as a kid, not even him. I guess like those records are so old that they wouldn't be digital at this point in time, so I guess that's why you can kind of get away with that type of stuff. And maybe he made a point to either just once again destroy any live photos that existed of him, or he made sure never. Well, I guess because he was running basically his entire life, so even when he settled down, he was always ready to run again if need be. But regardless. Anyway, the point I was trying to make is I just think it's funny because obviously the characters from the TV show are based on real people, but it's just, I guess it's almost that thing of like, you only know Silk Spectre and the comedian from the TV show. So I just think I guess that's kind of just a funny little detail about Angela like that. But nevertheless, they go and visit Lady True's facility, because it turns out the thing that dropped Angela's car was obviously something from her. And they meet her daughter Beyond, and obviously there's Lady True talking, basically because it comes up of like, oh yeah, Angela's from Vietnam too, like you are. It's like, oh really? What a coincidence. And then Angela being like, it's what was it, thermodynamic miracle or whatever. And she looks at Lori, and then Lori looks at her. I'm like, dude, I'm already loving this relationship so much. The last episode set it up. I hope we get more and more of this, because like just the back and forth of just kind of like, I don't know, like like, could legitimately, like, Lori's kind of an asshole, and I love it. Just kind of like how her, like, she got, like, these sarcastic remarks, and obviously she's really good at what she does because she knows way more than she kind of lets on and stuff like that. Even referencing the fact is, I was like, oh yeah, I went to your house. You have a really nice house. I even talked to your husband. It's like, wait, what? You're talking to my husband? Like, what was up with that? You know, it's kind of like, you didn't even come by me to do that. You just pop up at my place and do that. It's like, that's interesting. And then obviously Lady True is connected to all this because she talks about, oh, your grandfather wanted to know if you got the pills, which I love Angela being like, tell the old fucker if he wants to know he can come ask me himself. And I love they're saying this in Vietnamese, and I'm wondering is Lori, it seemed like she wasn't, but you know, we'll see whether she caught that conversation or not. But I also thought it was kind of interesting where it's like, oh, only ladies are allowed this far. So Petey he's like, I'll wait in the car again. He didn't say that, but it's funny to think about it. So I was like, I wonder why that specifically is. Why I was like, oh, ladies only. I wonder what that's about. Regardless, I forgot to also talk about it too. Like, she knows that, like, Will is still alive, so that must mean that he's over 100 years old, and a person that's over 100 years old would be in a wheelchair. So obviously she is connecting the dots. Luckily, Angela already got rid of the evidence, but once again, depending on whether the home dude in this suit, that vigilante dude, was sitting there to keep an eye on her so that evidence can be tracked down later on. You know, it depends on how that whole situation ends up playing out, but still. Circling back to the Adrian storyline, which I love that. It's like, all right, because it's like, oh yeah, she's like, because Lady True talks about the fact that she's basically picking up where Adrian's research left off or whatever. And you know, Lori's like, why'd you get like a gold statue of him and stuff like that? You know, because like in her culture, she's like, you know, respecting the elderly and stuff like that. But then she's like, yeah, but this is America, sweetheart. And it looks like shit because like, and I think it's interesting because it's like, wasn't the whole point that Adrian ended up getting plastic surgery, or was that supposed to be like a rumor or something? Because the fact is, the statue looks like Jeremy Irons, so that must mean that she's met him when he's older. For her to be able to get him like that, like, I don't know. So it makes me wonder about that, whether or not she has to have been in contact with him. Once again, or she might be the one that has him. Because hence, like I said, because for him, he ends up talking about later on, it's like for the past 4 years, he thought it was a paradise. I guess it's like, oh, here's a place I get to do my research unimpeded. I don't have to worry about anything else. I've kind of stopped, you know, shit from going sideways. It's all those years ago, obviously the events of Watchmen. So I get to kind of relax and kind of enjoy the good work that I've done. But the whole thing is, like, obviously he's being kept there by a game warden. So for him, he thought it was a paradise, but now it's a prison, which it seems like his entire storyline is trying to get out. Obviously, he's got the new formed Mr. Phillips and Miss Crawshank, which there's the whole situation of when he gets back to his place, it's filled with their bodies. He was like, I had a rough night. So I guess, like, he was so upset he went and slaughtered all of them. Is that what that's supposed to mean? Not unless that's retaliation from, like, it's the way he makes it sound, like, because he was like, I don't need this yet. So I guess it's the thing of they just infuriated him, or he was just naturally infuriated and he proceeded to kill everyone. That's what it seems like it. Not unless it was a thing of like, oh, there was an attack and everyone ended up dying. But I feel like you'd see more other bodies rather than just theirs. So I'm assuming it was straight up him. So that's interesting. And then he's using a catapult. So it's like he's catapulting the dead bodies. And I guess that's what he was talking about when he was talking about, like, the Mr. Phillips that was supposed to represent Mr. Manhattan before he became Mr. Manhattan in an experiment, and that Mr. Phillips burned up inside that thing, and it's like, oh, we'll use his body later on. And it's like, well, I guess we see what happens to the disposable bodies. It's like, is he sending them into space or what? Like, wherever he is, maybe he's trapped, and it's like if he gets enough bodies through, that must mean that, or, you know, because obviously he's testing something, because remember, Mr. Phillips from the last episode kind of ended up freezing to death. So it's like, I guess he's trying to get high, and I think he is trying to break through to the atmosphere. So either he's trying to get to must be trying to get to the moon. Maybe he's legitimately trying to leave the planet. I don't know. There's still kind of a lot of stuff, you know, open air about that. Another interesting aspect about this episode was the whole conversation between Angela and Cal. I didn't actually expect, because obviously the conversation earlier in the episode I thought was kind of interesting, where it seemed like, oh, does Cal know everything? And it's like later on it's like, oh no, he does, because it's like, oh yeah, it turns out your grandfather murdered Judd and everything. Because she was like, what did you talk to her about? And he was like, he basically saying like, oh, all the stuff that went down, which she was like, no, you didn't do that. He's like, you're right, I didn't. It's also interesting too, because like, you know, because even Lori keeps remarking about the fact is of like, oh yeah, Cal's pretty handsome. Basically talking about like how I guess he's better than her ex, the whole complicated Mr. Manhattan situation. Regardless of all that, I also thought it was interesting too, that whole conversation. I'm wondering what that means. I mean, maybe, I don't know, it just seemed like an interesting thing of like, oh yeah, like the siblings are going back and forth about the whole whether or not Uncle Judd is in heaven or whatever. But then Cal comes over and he's like, there is no heaven. It's like before Uncle Judd didn't exist. Then he was a baby. Then he was an adult. Now he's back to being nothing. He doesn't exist again. And it's like, so he's nowhere. And then Angelo's like, he's nowhere, which Cal was like, I mean, well, it is true, I guess, because I guess technically when we actually think about it, his body blew up. So Judd technically is scattered in a million pieces, but I guess who he is, his essence, is not. I don't know how to, you know, which I thought that was kind of interesting. I was like, oh, is that just kind of supposed to be like oh, you're going down an atheist route? Is that what that's supposed to represent? I don't know whether there's going to be something bigger to that or not. I mean, it's just interesting. It's like, oh, having those conversations with your kid. I mean, I think that's interesting to go about it that route. Just because, like, more often than not, I feel like more things will be like, yeah, no, he's in heaven, trying to make a more comforting thing of being like, no, he just doesn't exist. He's nowhere. And it's just kind of like a, who wants waffles? We do. So it's just kind of like, huh. It was just kind of, it was sad and just immediately moved on. I guess it's because, like, well, they're still young, so they'll formulate their own opinions when they grow up. You know, maybe, once again, could be a thing I'm just reading too much into, but, what I also think was interesting is because Angela brings up the fact is obviously like she knows that we met in Vietnam. Did you talk about that? You know, does Lori know about your accident or whatever? And he was like, no. And I'm like, what accident? Why is her knowing about y'all meeting in Vietnam? What's that supposed to mean? You know, like what's up with that? So there's that side of things. Then there's the whole thing with Beyond having her nightmare about like, oh, some men came. And I was wondering, I guess, is that her, like, I wonder, is it some trippy thing where it's like her daughter Beyond is actually a clone of herself? Like, obviously, like, the Mr. Phillips and the Miss Crowshanks are, like, failed experiments. And I guess, like, depending on whose DNA you're using, you can make them look, you know, because hence, like, obviously the DNA that was used to basically clone a baby for those two people whose property Lady True bought at the beginning. So it's like, maybe Beyond is having memories of her mom's. So maybe this has something to do with like what went down in Vietnam within Watchmen specifically. Like it's like men came to burn down our village and stuff like that, which part of me is thinking like the comedian, because that was kind of his thing, like the flamethrower and stuff like that. Once again, this is just kind of based on the movie. So I'm wondering, and it's like, oh, I was still walking and my feet hurt. And she was saying good, because I guess it's a thing of like, remember that pain. Not unless she's experimenting and, you know, because either she's transferring all her memories to her daughter, and not unless that's supposed to be her way of kind of living forever. I mean, that could still fill into, like, the whole possible clone storyline. I don't, like, her daughter being a clone or whatever. But nevertheless, the big thing, too, is, like, what is William's part to play in this? And we also see that even though he's over 100 years old, he can stand. So I guess it isn't too out of the question that he was able to hang Judd himself. Now, the question is, how much of that is out of order? Because he was saying, like, in 3 days, she's going to hate me. Because it's like, for him, it's like, I have to let her figure it out on her own. So, like, it seems like all of that is taking place before the first episode, is what that seems like that all is. So that, but even before Judd is murdered, but he's setting that up ahead of time, because he's like, because Lady True is kind of like, I'm not worried, I'm concerned, because when it comes to family, you get family can make things a little cloudy and cloud your judgment and stuff like that, which I'm like wondering, because he was like, what I'm doing, is it really any different from what you're doing? She's like, no, it's completely different. I'm like, oh, we'll see. So it's, I'm wondering what his purpose is. Is he trying to get Angela to know the truth, but also like trying to bring her into the fold or whatever they're doing. I don't know, because he talks about the fact is I'm all in, and he says TikTok. So it's like, okay, so does this mean that you are connected to the Cavalry? Because that's kind of their thing, which, to be fair, I guess they already kind of told us ahead of time that Judd was one, because he did the whole TikTok. Like, I thought that was supposed to be him just making fun of the whole, like, or at least kind of nodding towards the Cavalry, but now we see that he might have a connection to the Cavalry. It's like, okay. So that was kind of interesting. Like I said, the episode is in itself seems like it's different points in time, some stuff happening before others. It's just kind of told out of order in certain regards. So I just think that's kind of fascinating. I'm so curious to see where things kind of end up taking us going forward. Just based on someone else's thing, because like some people have seen up to episode 6. Like I think I won't go down it. Right? It's not like I know anything, but I've just heard people who, just like talk a little bit about those who have seen more than just the episodes that the general public has seen. Have talked about some things without going into spoilers about anything, just like that shit's definitely going to heat up over the next 2 episodes. Apparently episode 6 is going to be a slow burn, but 5, apparently the beginning is just going to be like, whoa, what the fuck, from what I've heard, so we'll ultimately see. But I'm so curious what the hell is going on. It's like kind of the whole point. And once again, like I said, I want some more Blake and Angela. I hope we get to see like more interactions between them, and I think we will, because obviously she's kind of running things right now, even going as far as taking Judd's office, which is like, oh, if you do that, you're gonna make people hate you, which Lori's kind of like, why do I give a shit what people think about me? I'm not here to be liked, so we'll see. And also, like I said, interested to find out about that whole Cal storyline of like what accident, like, him and Angela meeting, like what's up with that, so we'll ultimately have to wait and see. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, low light to the force, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.